So today is the fifth sermon in our series, United. It's gone by fast. Today's sermon is titled One Witness, and we will be exploring the significance of baptism, because we will be celebrating baptisms this morning. Now, I don't know about you, but I am loving this fall weather, and it is making me want to go and visit Yosemite. I have never seen Yosemite in the fall. Have you been there recently? Anyone? A couple of you? Have you seen it in the fall? Yes. Beautiful. Well, I just can't get over the fact, John and I talk about this a lot, how it is literally in our backyard. And the first time that I ever went was after we moved to Modesto and we drove up to Yosemite. And I think no matter how many times you experience it, it is awe-inspiring. The rock formations, the rushing waterfalls, the abundant life, it's spectacular. And I am always the inquisitive one. So when I was there for the first time, I kept thinking, gosh, how did this come to be? How did these rocks form? How long has this been here? Let me go look at the website. And so I spent many hours searching and researching about the history of the Yosemite Valley. But what I found, and you might already know this, it was new to me, was that the website says 3 million years ago, the Sierra Nevada had risen high enough for glaciers to form. And so through erosion and glaciation, it created what we see today in the valley. In other words, melting drips of water over time transformed this terrain of rock into this exquisite masterpiece that we have in our backyards. Scientifically, it is amazing to think about the power of water. That water has the power over time to shape and form the landscapes around us. It has the power to create and recreate. So the parallel for us today is this, that spiritually speaking, in the same way, God's living waters also has that same kind of power, the power to shape the landscapes of our lives. The Spirit moves sometimes in ways so subtle, drip, 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 that we may not even realize that God is changing us and shaping us and forming us, that we are being made into something new over the course of our lifetime. So today, as we celebrate baptism, we are celebrating the power of water, specifically God's Spirit-filled, living water that shapes and forms our Christian lives. So today, it's not so much of a sermon as a refresher, pun intended. That was not a good one. I didn't get a reaction from Armin. He's is a brief refresher on the beginnings of baptism and why it's important to us today. So part one, the beginning of baptism. We'll start in the Old Testament. Okay, so we're moving now from the Yosemite Valley to the Jordan River Valley in ancient Mesopotamia. So I want you to kind of picture this in your mind's eye geographically. A wild desert land, a deluge of beige, and people who had walked the sandy, rocky desert terrain for 40 years. And finally, in the distance, they see a wide and winding river cut through the wilderness landscape, transforming it. And as they approach on the eastern side of the Jordan River, they can see their destination, the promised land, on the other side. And then they finally pass through the rushing river water. And as I imagine this scene in my head, I imagine they're splashing and frolicking and maybe dunking and drinking this water that they have long longed for. This hallelujah moment of final freedom to the crossing over of the promised land. It's this moment in our biblical history that is both symbolic and historical, because it's the early beginnings of baptism. Biblically speaking, this is the first instance that ordinary people, the masses, experience a holy cleansing by water as they enter into God's promised land. It's this new generation of Israelites who have only known desert that cross, and the dirt and the dust of the wilderness journey is washed off of them. And spiritually speaking, they enter into a new way of being. In fact, they become a new nation at this moment, and they are reborn. To me, there is no greater image of baptism. And so, historically, from then on, the Hebrew religious tradition, the Israelites would remember this washing over. And they would commemorate this with a ritual of remembrance, which over time became a Jewish ritual of cleansing called the mikveh. And this Jewish ritual of cleansing was a purity ritual of water submersion, a cleansing of one's wilderness ways. So you can see how it went from one thing and over time became another. All right, let's fast forward to the New Testament, the beginnings of baptism. So what is truly remarkable to me, and yes, I am a biblical history lover, so maybe it's just interesting to me, but what is truly remarkable to me is that a few thousand years later, in that exact same spot, the Jordan River, at those same waters and rocks, Jesus was baptized. It's the same place. It's the same site. I mean, the symbolism of that is powerful, is it not? It's this eclipsing moment of promise. And as Jesus passes through these same holy, rushing river waters, he's baptized by John the Baptist. And again, it's a symbolic and historical moment, and it's the early beginnings of baptism. Biblically speaking, Jesus' baptism signals a spiritual shift, a new covenant, a new way of being for God's people. Meaning we no longer had to do that Jewish ritual of purity for forgiveness. We no longer had to be washed and purified by a priest, but now all we had to do was be near to Christ to receive God's mercy and power. From that time on, Christians who believed in Jesus Christ took up a new ritual of remembrance known as the sacrament of baptism. The holy waters of Christian baptism that for thousands of years have been shaping and forming and recreating God's people into something brand new. And as I think of the majesty of Yosemite and the beauty and the power of the water and what it's created, think of how much more God can do with our lives. The beauty and the power of water and the Spirit in our lives, forming and shaping us. So today is simply a prompt to remember our witness, our history, to remember the power of this ritual and how thousands and thousands of years it has breathed new life into God's people. And my prayer is it might do the same for us this day. Amen? Amen. Let us reflect and sing together our sermon hymn.